Welcome to the Wounds That Do Not Heal. My name is Tressa Brady. After my own experience and hearing time and time again about domestic violence in military families, I decided to start this podcast. Tune in for stories, resources, and guidance on how to get the support you need for your family and your safety. Once there was a tree, and she loved a little boy. And every day the boy would come and he would gather her leaves and make them into crowns and play king of the forest. He would climb up her trunk and swing from her branches and eat apples. They would play hide and go seek. And when he was tired, he would sleep in her shade. And the boy loved the tree very much. And the tree was happy. But time went by and the boy grew older and the tree was often alone. Then one day the boy came to the tree and the tree said, "Come, boy. Come and climb up my trunk and swing from my branches and eat apples and play in my shade and be happy." "I'm too big to climb and play," said the boy. "I want to buy things and have fun. I want some money." "I'm sorry," said the tree, "but I have no money. I have only leaves and apples. Take my apples, boy, and sell them in the city. Then you will have money and you will be happy." And so the boy climbed up the tree and gathered her apples and carried them away. And the tree was happy. But the boy stayed away for a long time. And the tree was sad. The excerpt I've just read is from a children's book written in 1965 by author Shel Silverstein. The story goes on, and if you aren't familiar with it, this theme plays out where the little boy stays away for a long time, and the tree is sad. But then the boy always returns when he needs something from the tree, and the tree continues to sacrifice itself for the happiness of the boy. But the tree's happy because the overarching theme of the book is that the tree loved the boy very much, even more than she loved herself. This book would go on to become one of the most controversial books and actually be dubbed one of the most divisive books in children's literature. The book has been challenged and even banned in some schools and states. The reason? The interpretation of the book left some upset. Some felt the book had sexist content, which I think is a stretch. Some thought the book encouraged selfishness, narcissism, and even codependency. Some environmentalists felt that the boy exploited the tree, and some just thought the book contained dark humor and gave poor advice. When I was pregnant, I was trying to put together this bookshelf wall for my little girl. I went to a few bookstores trying to find books that reminded me of my youth in the 80s and 90s, and I grabbed the staples, the Velveteen Rabbit, Charlotte's Web, Goodnight Moon, I'll Love You Forever, my very favorite, and then I saw this book, The Giving Tree. I grabbed it, not because I recalled the book, but because I actually recalled the author, Shel Silverstein. My mom was a fourth grade teacher when I was growing up, and I used to love to go from my classroom down to the big kids class where she would read them Shel Silverstein books. And it just gave me this feeling of nostalgia when I saw it. So I bought the book. I put it in baby girl's nursery and forgot about it for a little while. But when I was finally putting the finishing touches on her nursery, I came across the book. And I sat down in my rocking chair and I read it cover to cover. And I remember being horrified. The first thing that came to my mind was the abusive relationship I'd left with my first husband. I had tried to bend and break and reshape myself in every way possible to please that person, but he was unpleasable. He did not care if I was chopping off my own limbs to satisfy him. It was just always about what he needed and wanted. So for me, this book represented an abusive relationship. And I remember I put the book in a box that I would, donate to Goodwill or whatever, and I forgot about it. Fast forward almost 2 years later, we'd moved into a new house and I was setting up my little girl's room in the new house. I again came across the book, never donated it, and I was going to throw it out. But for some reason, I sat down and I read it again. And this time, the book had a totally different meaning for me. I'd now been a mother for the past 2 years, and this book represented to me the capacity of a mother's love, a love that truly knows no bounds. A love that means that you would literally, without question, lay down and give your own life for the life of your child. And this time when I read it, I loved it. It just represented so much of what I felt when I held my baby girl. I didn't see that the little boy was selfish in the book. He was just somewhat benign in the story. I just saw a mother who was willing to sacrifice it all to make sure that her child was taken care of. When I started doing research about women that were victims of intimate partner abuse by combat soldiers, one of the very first women I discovered was Meghan Santiago. And the first thing I said to myself after familiarizing myself with her tragic story was, Meghan was the tree. She had an endless capacity of love for her children. So who was Meghan Santiago? Well, Meghan was beautiful, a beloved only child, cousin, and friend. She grew up in Florida and was very close to her mom. She was a little older than her cousins, and so the news clips I watched of them talking about Meghan talked about how she used to babysit them growing up in Florida and how she had this infectious laugh and could find the light and good in anything and anyone. The very first video I saw regarding Meghan's story was that of her mother being wheeled down the hospital corridor in a wheelchair. She was behind a hospital stretcher that Meghan's lifeless body was strapped to. Her sobs could be heard along with the beeping of the machines keeping Meghan alive as she watched her little girl move through her world for the last time. While hospital doctors, nurses, and employees stood at attention in the hallway, a tradition or ceremony that is called the honor walk that takes place in a hospital to honor organ donors and show gratitude for their gift. It usually takes place when a patient is moved from their operating room so their organs can be removed. Meghan's last act on earth would be to give life to others. But how did Meghan get there? It all started when Meghan met and married a Special Forces soldier named Joseph Santiago. Well, I didn't find a lot of information about their early relationship or how they met. I did scroll through Meghan's Facebook page from the day she started it in 2011. What I saw was a girl who turned into a woman, a wife, and a mother. She was beautiful. In another life, she may have even been a movie star. She was very petite, with dark hair, a megawatt smile, and these huge chocolate brown eyes. And her husband, Joseph, was very handsome. He had a muscular frame, strong jaw, beautiful smile, and eyes as well. And Meghan clearly loved her family like nothing else. She was very patriotic. She was often discussing her love of country and her pride in being a military spouse and the pride she felt for her husband's sacrifices as a Special Forces soldier. Joseph was a signal support systems specialist out of the 5th Special Forces Group. More than anything, I saw Meghan's love for her children. The first pictures I saw of Meghan and Joseph were in 2013. In 2014, they welcomed a baby boy, who I will be calling C, and a little girl came in early 2017, who I will call A. Meghan's page was filled with her beautiful boy, but she wasn't very active in 2018, so I didn't see much after that. But what Meghan's Facebook page emulated was this idyllic life, a family that was an all-American family. Meghan had one post where she discussed that when she was growing up, she was never really that girl who felt she was destined to be a mother, who longed for a life with children. But she said once she had her little boy, she knew she was put on earth to be a mother, and it was her favorite thing in the world. And by all accounts, Meghan was an amazing mother. There were videos of her and Joseph at Disney on Ice with little C, traveling around with him, family photos at baseball games, matching football jerseys on Sundays, in front of the Christmas tree. And it looked like Joe was a wonderful cook who loved to spoil his wife with these gorgeous meals that honestly looked like a gourmet chef had prepared them. She was so proud of her little family. It's hard to say where things went wrong. They bounced around military bases living in Germany for a few years and then ultimately ending up in Kentucky on Fort Campbell. So it's hard to know where the bottom fell out. We would later find out the cracks were always there. Court records would show that domestic violence had been investigated in 2019 and 2020, and that CPS had even been called on Joe more than once. One of the things I know to be true is that these types of things don't seem to get communicated across bases, which is a problem that needs to be fixed. Most of the facts I learned from this case came from reading the archives of Joseph's court-martial on the U.S. Army's court-martial public records system. I read every single motion, response, appeal, and noticed that there was. And what I found was a chilling tale of a woman who was desperately trying to get herself and her kids to safety, who had informed her inner circle of the abuse she was enduring, and who was meticulously trying to plan an escape to safety for her and her babies. Meghan put a plan in motion, and she was set to be picked up by a family friend in October after Joseph went TDY out of the area. Sadly, just 10 days shy of that day she set for freedom, her husband put a stop to that plan when he brutally beat Meghan while their 7-year-old boy and 4-year-old girl were in their house on base at Fort Campbell. And it wasn't just Meghan and the 2 children. Meghan was 32 weeks pregnant with their 3rd child. As I researched Meghan's story, I did reach out to numerous people, and ultimately I ended up talking briefly to a close family friend of Meghan's who was very involved in the planning of her escape. I also talked with Joseph's mother, Stacey, an incredibly sweet woman who loves her son and loves Meghan, and she adores her grandchildren, and her whole world has been rocked by this as well. And here is what I deduced between those I talked to and court records. In September of 2021, Meghan had no access to a phone unless Joe was home and she used his, as Joe had taken hers away in 2020. She had no access to a car unless she borrowed Joe's, and she had no access to funds. While Joseph was away at work, she would send friends and family messages from Facebook Messenger and other apps divulging how badly the abuse was physically escalating and how scared she was for herself and her babies. Meghan had been in contact with an old friend from back in Florida that she was close to, who I will refer to as DF, and he was helping her plan an escape and offering to let her and the children move in with him and hide out. She'd begun to send her mother and her friends proof of the abuse and photos on these apps, and she told them to keep those photos but not to tell anybody yet. Meghan and her mother Andrea had always been extremely close, but sadly, shortly before this time frame, Andrea had suffered a stroke and was unable to offer the support and physical help that Meghan needed. She needed someone to physically come and pick her up, help pack her and her children's belongings, and take her away to an undisclosed location where Joseph couldn't find them. She said Joseph was going TDY on October 7th of 2021, and so that was the day a friend was coming to get her. While Meghan was divulging to her family and close friends that there was escalating abuse, she did not report to the police and would even go as far as to cover for Joseph, which is a very common occurrence with victims of intimate partner abuse. Court documents would show that military police, child protective services, and more had done inquiries. But of course, they'd always come to check on Meghan while Joseph was present. And if you happen to be with any of these entities, please know an abuse victim is never going to admit to abuse in the presence of their abuser. That's asking to be murdered, because more likely than not, they may get out and come for you. You are jeopardizing victims' lives by asking them in front of their abusers. And messages in court documents would show that this is exactly what Meghan was in fear of. In May of 2021, Meghan was in a small vehicle fender bender in Joseph's truck, to which she reported having no injuries. Shortly after that time frame, she would send her mother pictures of 2 black eyes that she said Joseph had given her. Joe would later go on to claim those black eyes had been a result of her hitting her head in the car accident, but Meghan's messages very clearly stated that this was not the case. She would say to a friend that she had to stay inside with the kids for a few weeks because Joe didn't want anyone to see her injuries. A neighbor inquired with Joseph about Meghan's whereabouts during that time frame. He'd begun to worry because she was normally outside playing with the kids, and Joseph would tell that neighbor that she'd been injured in a car wreck. The neighbor recalled being suspicious because the truck seemed to be in pristine shape. He went and peeked through the truck windows and even tried to look into the house to make sure that Meghan was okay. Somebody noticed him looking in the windows of the Santiago home, and the police came to question him. And he shared with the police that he was looking for Meghan because he suspected she was the victim of domestic violence and he was worried for her safety. He requested a welfare check. The police would go on to question Meghan with Joseph present, and she didn't disclose any abuse. Meghan would message her mother after, "I am just scared they will not make him leave or stay away because that wrath would be my last." In June of 2021, Meghan messaged more images of abuse to her mother and asked her not to tell anyone, but to keep them safe. She assured her mother the plan of her escape was coming with the kids. On August 30th of 2021, Meghan told her mother not to call the cops. She said that Joe told her not even a judge could keep him from killing her if she tried to take those kids. On September 15th, Meghan messaged her good friend DF the words, "I feel so lost. I really think he's going to kill me." On September 16th of 2021, in response to DF pleading with her to call the cops, Meghan responded, "It's not as easy as it seems. He's threatened to kill me and make my kids orphans if the cops show up. He beat the hell out of me today. He boiled water and then told me he would throw it on my face so that nobody else will ever want me." That very next day, September 17th, Meghan asked DF to call the police for her. She told him it had to be when Joseph wasn't there because if the police came while he was there, she would for sure be killed. She also said that he beat her with a broomstick, threatened to drown her, revive her, and drowned her again, and then told her the only reason he hadn't put a hole in her head was because her daughter was there. On September 18th, Meghan told DF, "I just feel so trapped. I have no phone, no car, no debit card, and I'm worried they will let him right back in. If that happens, I'm definitely dead." Now, I want to pause right here and acknowledge something. For those of you listening who are saying to yourselves, "Oh my gosh, she had so much proof. He'd be in jail. There's no way they'd just let him go." Sadly, that's not the case. Many times the abuser will even flip the script and accuse the victim of being the abuser. And in some cases, the victim's even arrested. And I know that firsthand because in 2009, that happened to me. Ultimately, the charges were dropped because they were fake. But this is a very common tactic. And when you're dealing with the military police, well, let's just say that often they side with the military member. Other times they will be given leniency by judges for their military service. Actually, stay with me here for a minute because I'm going to quickly reference another story within Meghan's story. But I was just reading about a man named Bryson Rivers out of Tennessee who beat his girlfriend within inches of her life. He goes to jail. He went before the court and he pleaded for bail and he stated that he was trying to join the Air Force and make something of his life. He'd just never been given a chance. That girl's father was there in court and he begged and pleaded with the judge and the DA not to let Bryson out. He said this man had done this to his daughter 5 or 6 times and the next time he's going to kill her. He begged them not to lower his bail. But Judge Cheryl Blackburn decided that didn't matter. So she lowered Bryson's bail to an amount he could meet. And within days of his release, police chased him from a car where they found his dead girlfriend's body. Her name was Lauren Johansson. And sadly, this seems to be a common theme in domestic violence cases. There's a reason that women don't call for help, and it's because they know the judges will let these men walk. And Lauren's case is an interesting one because it seems a number of blunders occurred that included not putting his GPS ankle monitor to the right geography. They released him at the wrong time of day. They weren't tracking him. His ankle monitor battery died and they did nothing. So many blunders, but that's the point. It's always something with these court systems, and women have learned that they can't trust the system to protect them. These perpetrators beat women again and again, and police say, "Let's give him another shot." And lawyers will say, "Judge, give my client another shot." And the victims say, "Please, judge, if you give him another chance, he will kill me." And the judge says, "Meh, we'll give him another chance." And that man kills a woman. And the police and the lawyers and the judges say, "Man, I wish there was something we could have done." Femicide is an epidemic in this country, across the world actually. But 3 women a day die in America. You know, all the time I get hate comments and messages from men saying, "Hey, I was a victim of abuse. It's not just women being abused. How come you're not talking about women abusing men?" And to them I say, you are right. Women do abuse men. I've actually seen it firsthand. I had a personal trainer I worked with years ago, and he was the victim of horrible coercive control by his wife. Actually, she was military. She cyberstalked him and constantly accused him of cheating, though he definitely would never. And she showed up wherever he was. He said she couldn't train female clients, which meant he couldn't make his goals for work. She stalked him. She harassed him. She berated him. It was hellish. I've seen it, and I do not deny that this happens. But what I'm calling attention to is the murder of 3 women a day in America. That's the difference. Women are dying across this world from intimate partner abuse, and the military and the justice system in this country are culpable. This is why people like Meghan don't admit to the abuse when the police are on their doorstep and CPS is interviewing them and asking them in front of their abuser to confirm abuse. On September 23rd of 2021, Meghan messaged DF, "Joe told me if the cops show up, he will kill me." And he held his .45 to my head. That same day, she messaged somebody else. "He doesn't want me to have friends because he's afraid I will tell everyone and it'll ruin his career." She added, "CPS has already been called on multiple times, but I lie to cover for him." The last thing CPS said to me was, "Well, good luck." That same day, Meghan messaged another friend. "Joe doesn't want me to have friends because he's afraid I will tell everyone and ruin his career. CPS has already been called on him multiple times, but I lie to cover for him." The last thing they said to me was, "Good luck," because they know the truth. And this is the problem. In some states, some laws are being or have been enacted that will allow a police officer to arrest a suspect when domestic violence is suspected, even if the victim doesn't wish to press charges or denies the abuse. Some district attorneys will even pursue charges when this happens. However, in my experience, this is not the case with the military, and that needs to change. These women are captives. Of course, they aren't going to tell you in front of their abusers. CPS and the military police both knew Meghan was being abused, but they only confronted her in front of her abuser, and they never intervened despite knowing that she was in grave danger. On September 24th of 2021, Meghan again expressed her fear of being killed and her worries over the cops coming. She texted a friend, "He's beating the shit out of me. I have bruises all over. I'm so scared to call the cops because they're going to let him right back in." In additional messages, she would say not only had he threatened her with a gun, but also a knife to her body, and that he would kill her if the cops showed up. On September 26th of 2024, Meghan would message a friend, "I'm alive. He punched and hit me again last night and just now. It hurts to even breathe." It would later be noted in medical records that Meghan had numerous injuries in her body that were in various stages of healing. They noted a rib that had been fractured a few months back. What happened next is nothing short of devastating. With a plan in place for Meghan and her 2 children and unborn baby to be picked up on October 7th and to go live with her good friend back in Florida, Meghan was looking ahead to her future. And on the morning of September 27th, a recruiter called Joseph's phone looking for Meghan to discuss her resume he found online for a job in Florida. He also followed up with a text at 11:31 saying he would like to connect with her to discuss jobs in Florida. While I'll never know why Meghan would put Joseph's phone number on her resume, I can only assume she also put a note in there to only call at certain hours, or that maybe when she had the phone in her possession, if they did, perhaps she erroneously left it on her resume and didn't realize it. Whatever way, it was the last communication that was sent to Meghan because at 4:34 p.m. that same day, Joseph was seen on his Arlo security camera at his home entering from work. In the late afternoon or early evening, Joseph would beat Meghan so severely that her sternum would snap, while 32 weeks pregnant. He would not reach out for help for what we know to be over an hour and 20 minutes. And we know she was out that long due to the time his security camera showed him arriving home and the time his Google searches began. Between 6:11 p.m. and 7:26 p.m., he would scour the internet for ways to awaken his wife from unconsciousness. He searched things like wife unconscious and won't wake up, how to wake wife up from unconsciousness, how to tell if somebody is faking unconsciousness, unconscious from a hard blow to the chest, hard blow to the chest and won't wake up, unconscious but eyes aren't dilating. He also tried shaking her, pouring water on her, and he would go on to explain to the paramedics later that the reason half the skin was burned off of her palm was that because he'd use a lighter on her hand to try to bring her back to consciousness. Eventually, Joseph would walk across the street to the home of a staff sergeant on base who he can be seen talking to on the man's Ring camera. He's holding little girl A while C stands at his side. He asks the staff sergeant if he can watch the kids, to which the staff sergeant asks if everything is okay. And Joseph replies, "I don't know." The sergeant would later say that he thought at most the two were amidst an argument and he wanted to go over and try to de-escalate the situation. Only after persistent questioning did Joseph go on to ask the man to take a look at his wife. The sergeant found Meghan unconscious on the couch. Joseph asked if he should call 911, to which the sergeant urged him to. At around 7:39 p.m. that evening, Joseph would call 911. He would tell him that his wife had been sleeping a lot that day, and when he came home from work, he found her unconscious. He would go on to show that he'd tried everything to wake her, including pouring hot water on her, shaking her, and holding a flame to her hand. EMTs would show up and transport Meghan on a helipad from Fort Campbell. During that transfer, an EMT would note multiple bruises on Meghan's tiny body and take pictures of them. Meghan was transported to Vanderbilt Hospital. Fort Campbell Emergency Line would report that he seemed arguably self-focused during the call, unagitated, and at one point he made an incriminating remark when he said, "I'm f***ing horrible." Upon arriving at Vanderbilt, doctors would go on to conduct CTs, X-rays, and scans of Meghan and her unborn baby to guide their treatment of her. What they found was bleeding around Meghan's brain, a broken sternum, and numerous other injuries to her body. An emergency cesarean was performed, and Meghan's premature baby girl was born and transferred to the NICU. Meghan's sweet baby girl would go on to live and would be given her mother's middle name. Meghan's condition never improved and continued to decline despite treatment. She was declared brain dead and taken off of life support on October 3rd, just a few days shy of the day she'd planned her escape. Meghan's CT scans would show multiple breaks in different stages of healing, as I previously mentioned, and her autopsy would go on to reveal multiple traumatic injuries besides the broken sternum, including bruising to most of her tiny body, hemorrhaging to her head and brain, and additional fractured ribs. Blunt force trauma was the cause of her death. As much as I'd like to say this stopped here and Joseph did the right thing and turned himself in, Joseph would go on to plead not guilty, and his reprehensible law team would fight tooth and nail to suppress evidence and paint Meghan as the cause of her own death. They would concoct a story where they blamed any arguments on an alcohol addiction of Meghan's and claim that Joseph didn't know Meghan was pregnant, and that on the day of her injuries that she was heavily intoxicated and fell down the stairs into a Tuff box, Tuff box, like those plastic bins you see that are black with the yellow lids. Yeah, he claimed she was trashed and fell down the stairs into one of those. Anyways, they would go on to search the home and see no proof of this, and after searching and seizing numerous devices, they found a lot of evidence to prove that the contrary was true. And while I won't address whether or not Meghan had a drinking issue or tried to hide her pregnancy, I could say that Joseph did have a picture of Meghan's pregnant belly on his phone, and if she was drinking excessively, who the hell could blame her, trying to numb her pain and injuries? But again, the only account I have of Meghan's drinking being a problem is from court document accusations by Joseph's team. Other items that were found during a forensic search of the devices in the computer that Meghan used for Facebook in their home was a recorded conversation where Joseph apologized to Meghan for hitting her, and numerous searches about how to hide bruises and make them heal faster. There were also multiple pictures of injuries to Meghan, including a picture of Meghan's unconscious body after the last beating she endured. Joseph's mom, Stacy, would give an emotional testimony in court that she felt she failed Joseph. She herself was a victim of domestic violence, and she said she stayed with Joseph's father despite physical abuse that Joseph would witness because she didn't know how to get out or where to go. She said Joseph had so much good in him, but as he got older, she saw the same anger in him that his abusive father had. Joseph's father would actually take the stand as well, and while he would not admit to the abuse, he acknowledged that there was a great deal of turmoil in Joseph's childhood home. One of the biggest contentions I have with the military is their recruiting tactics and their screening for recruits. You will notice a large portion of this nation's military that are enlisted have come from socioeconomically challenged geographies and backgrounds of less than idyllic childhoods, which is by design. The military doesn't go into rich kids' neighborhoods and try to dissuade them from going off to college. They know those kids have a plan and a support system for the most part. They target kids who have challenging home lives, who live in poor areas, and who have no resources. They dangle the opportunity to travel the world, receive signing bonuses and health insurance and basic housing allowance and all the perks of military life, which probably means they'll send them to Korea for a year and then station them in Yuma, Arizona. Anyways, don't get me wrong. I think these kids should be afforded every opportunity in this life as children who were born into a life of affluence. But the military doesn't give them the support they need to cope with their lives in the military. If you're going to bring on recruits who already have grown up in toxic environments, you have to preemptively give them the support and mental health resources that they will need so that they have half a chance of surviving a lifestyle that would challenge even the most mentally healthy of young people. Recruits are given strenuous physical tests to see if they can make it in the military. And there are numerous additional factors that are taken into consideration. If they're over a certain height, they can't be pilots. If they have poor eyesight, or if they have allergies that can cause systemic reactions, they can be ruled out. But what about their mental health? Some branches will have a psychological evaluation, but nothing that is near stringent enough. There are restrictions for people who have serious diagnoses like bipolar or manic depression, but a lot of 18-year-olds coming from impoverished backgrounds haven't received a lot of mental health therapy and diagnoses at 18. So the military will pull these kids with a history of abuse or with a history of being violent themselves, and then where do you think they put them? Infantry, door kickers, if you will. collateral damage for the military. And if they're really good athletes and thrive in that environment, they all want to be special forces. But that life isn't for everyone. It requires a level of emotional intelligence to survive that and to be able to come home and seek the help you rightfully need. And so I think that ruling out a person due to a past history of trauma or rage and maybe pointing them towards a different career field in the military may be the nicest thing you can do for them. And sure, statistically, it's true that those in the military who don't see combat also experience levels of PTSD. The levels of domestic violence and familicide aren't the same. This seems to be a combat soldier or special forces epidemic. I often think of the irony that we send American men into battle in the Middle East to fight for the rights of women, to nation build, to build schools there and allow women to get educations. They're there trying to stop Sharia law and men from murdering their wives. And then they come home from the same war and end up killing their wives or themselves. It's an absolute unfathomable phenomenon that just keeps happening. Joseph was arguably a very good soldier. He thrived in a leadership position. He was able to compartmentalize while he was deployed in his work life, and he was different at home. But the military failed him. I actually ran a background check on Joseph myself. It was like $20 on Intellius. And what I found was an arrest in 2004 for some type of harassment and another one in 2006 for assault. I'm not sure how those went down or if he was convicted or what happened, but they do show up on his background report. And he didn't join the military until 2007. I'm not saying he shouldn't have been allowed to join, but the signs were there. I found out he was also married prior to Meghan as well, and she had apparently written letters and gone to the military for help with no result. Joseph should have at the very least been required some level of cognitive therapy or been ruled out for a combat role. I can't help but wonder what Joseph and Meghan's life would have been like if he would have been a chef. Maybe totally different. Maybe they'd be happy. Or perhaps, due to the violence he experienced in his childhood, this would have been the inevitable outcome regardless. But I can't help but think that all the trauma in his deployments and in his service he did for our country and his PTSD played some part in his actions. And I put a lot of blame on the military for that. If they're going to sign these kids up, they have to do better by them. I truly feel for Joseph's mother. She did the best she could by her son. She tried to protect him. And she went from being a mother who people congratulated on and recognized her for being the mother of our nation's hero to feeling a great deal of shame because she feels like she didn't do enough to prevent him from becoming an abuser like his father. The last time I spoke to Stacy, I told her this: Joseph can never make up for what he did. He can never make it up to his children, that they will be raised without knowing their mother and with the absence of their father. He can't make it up to her two cousins that she grew up with or her aunt, that they don't get to grow old alongside Meghan. He certainly can't make it up to her mother who lost the center of her entire world. One of the most heart-wrenching parts of this entire case was when I read that Meghan's cousins had to go to the nursing home that Meghan's mother was being cared in after her stroke. And she saw them and she lit up and she said, Meghan will be here in 2 weeks. And they had to tell her that actually, no, Meghan wasn't coming. She wasn't coming ever. The cousin said that after Andrea found that out, she seemed to lose her will to go on. I would do the same thing. Joseph can't take back the atrocities that he has done, but he now has a choice. He can either grow more miserable every day and die an angry, rageful old man, or he can use his story as a testament to help other soldiers get help before they end up killing their wives and maybe even their children, like some of the cases I'll be sharing. I do hope one day he will speak out and talk about how badly he needed help and how the military can make systemic changes to help these soldiers and to prevent these wives from dying. I actually told his mom I would really like to go see him in prison and share his voice. If it could convince one struggling soldier out there to go get help and possibly save the life of a military spouse, it would be worth it. In the end, Despite all the motions to suppress evidence and the defense's tangled web of lies, Joseph was found guilty of murder as well as injury to his unborn child. He was found not guilty of domestic violence, which is just proof that this judicial system fails, often and regularly, for victims, because there's a mountain of evidence that he was abusing Meghan. But Joseph will serve a life term, which can be as little as like 20 years in some states, and he'll have an additional 6 months at the end of that for endangering his baby girl, who was unborn. He then will have the opportunity for parole, and it's highly likely that Joseph could be released as young as his late 40s or 50s. It's my ultimate hope that in the interim between now and then, he finds a way to make an impact on the military system's shortcomings or to inspire others to seek help. Joseph addressed the judge and said, "I'm sorry about my wife. I'm sorry, and I hope she can forgive me. I wish we could have raised our kids together. Throughout my life, I've been trying to escape my past, but it's always been chasing me." He then took a deep breath and addressed Meghan's family in the gallery. To her mother, "I'm sorry I failed you and her. I honored to love her, and I did not live up to that promise. To my children, I am sorry for everything. Nothing I can say will bring Meghan back. And though my words are hollow, they are true," he said through tears as he looked at Meghan's family. "I'm very sorry. Regardless of what happened next, I'm very sorry." As for Meghan's baby girl, I'd like to say that after fighting for her life in the NICU, that her little baby girl was placed in the arms of family. But for many months, she was in foster care as family sought custody. The older two were placed in state care temporarily as well, which makes no sense to me. There were loving parties on both sides who wanted those kids. But I'm happy to report now that sweet baby girl, who will be turning 3 in October, is reunited with her 2 older siblings, and they are being raised by family members all together. I was told in confidence who has them and where, and I will not divulge that. But I know that despite initial fears that baby girl wouldn't speak or walk, that she's running and talking and healthy. When I think of Meghan, I see that video in my mind of her honor walk, of her being pushed down that hospital corridor to donate her organs. She was so tiny that her organs were able to go to save the lives of children and adults. I think about the shift in me when I became a mother. The fears of what could happen to me in my life became replaced with fears of what could happen to my children. Anytime I read something that happens to kids that's tragic, I shudder and I just can't imagine how I could survive that. The times I have in my own mind made deals with God that if something is coming and something should happen, let it happen to me, but save my children. And I imagine Meghan on that operating table. Now, I don't know if you believe in a higher power, but I certainly do. And I picture Meghan begging God as her soul is above her little body, "Please, God, take me, but save my little girl." And I imagine as they wheel her little baby girl to the NICU, that Meghan is at peace. I think she watches her 3 children from above and is happy. Because at the end of the day, Meghan was a mom, and she loved her little boy and her little girls very much, even more than she loved herself. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you think this content would be helpful for someone you know, please share the link with them. Sources can be found in the show notes of today's episode.